verbal store back in, you know, I can feel that.
You're taking my,
Maybe not quite that far.
stitching the name and vein over there.
Yeah. Thinking about how to get home. I'm trying to figure out how to get home after work. I'm thinking up to Myrtle and around the whole route and back in.
Oh, you need to drive home at 3 in the morning, right? That one.
Oh, that's an easy one.
Okay, let's get started, everyone.
Okay. So, whoa, okay, I'm gonna get used to that mic. Welcome to the Regional Parks and Trails Committee. I would like to open this meeting of May 28th and recognize that we are gathering for this important conversation on the traditional lands of the Comox Nation. And we are grateful for their grace and collaboration in all the work we do. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda, please? Thank you. Thank you. Do I need to say, do you want me to say their names? You got it? Okay. And do we need to all in favor of that? Okay, all in favor? And any opposed? No. Okay, thank you. And now we are on to the Regional Parks and Trails Strategic Plan. Thank you. And seconder, thank you, Director Moran. And all in favor of that? And any opposed? Thank you. And I think we're turning that over to staff to present that report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mark Harrison, our Manager of Parks, is going to introduce the staff report and then I believe introduce our guests as well and carry us through the presentation of the strategic plan. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you, James, through the chair to the committee. It's really great to be back at the RPTC again. A lot has happened since our last meeting in November, which is, it's hard to believe that was 6 months ago. But we've had that input from that November session where we did a workshop on our draft directions was really important and really helped with the crafting of the draft plan, which we are going to present here today. We also had a lot of great input from Comox First Nation, and we also had a lot of great engagement and input from the community. And we'll be going over really some of the high-level highlights from that engagement plan here today as well. So presenting with me is Kate Evans. She's the principal of Lanark and has really done a lot of the heavy lifting to get this plan here to us today. So we thank her for all her efforts. The plan here is just to do a little small presentation and then look at highlights from the engagement plan and then also look at some of the highlights of the draft plan. And then we'll open it up for discussion because really the key here today is to try to get that discussion going and get feedback and input from the committee here today. So just looking at the agenda, we'll do a quick little process review, which is basically to just see where we're at in our three-phase process. A quick little touch on the engagement that we've had so far with Comox First Nation. We'll look at highlights from our community engagement, which happened in January and February of this year, which really helped shape the plan. And then Kate will speak to the draft strategic plan, looking at really high-level highlights, focusing on the goals and objectives, and then kind of just touching on actions just as an example. And just to explain how those actions impact the objectives and the goals. And then we'll have time for questions and discussion. So really quickly with the process, last time we met in November, we were at phase 2 of the draft directions. We are now in phase 3. Since our last meeting, we went out to the public and engaged them in January and February. And have used the input that we received from the last RPTC meeting and from that, the community and Comox First Nation to come to where we're at now with a strategic plan. So critical to this whole planning process and really understanding the big regional parks picture is understanding the rights and the interests of the Comox First Nation. So the CVRD does understand that Comox are rights holders and they are stewards of the land. And they also have a shared interest in this service. So we have been working closely with Comox on this plan, and we really appreciate all the efforts and input that they provided into this draft plan. So just a quick little recap on some of the key pieces of engagement that we've had with Comox First Nation. We started with letters about the process in December of 2022 and May of 2023 when we were just starting the strategic planning process. And that was really to inform them of the process, clarify the purpose, and really try to understand how they wish to be engaged through the process. We did meet with Comox Chief and Council in August of 2023, and we received some really great feedback from that council and really learned to understand their strong interest in land acquisition. A lot of their input that they provided then was directly put into the report that we have here today. We then did a progress report to Comox First Nation, just basically let them know where we're at and next steps in the process. Comox staff did attend one of our RPTC meetings, so the November one, which we were very, very thankful to have them here. And that staff member provided some very valuable input that was used into the plan. Next, we met directly with Comox staff in January. And then met with the Comox Lands Committee. And we really were discussing and trying to seek feedback on their rights and interests and the visions, goals, all those draft directions. All the feedback that we received have been incorporated into the plan. And again, we thank Comox for their feedback. In terms of future planning, we do plan to meet with Chief and Council and bring this draft plan to them for feedback and comment in June. So like I said, in January and February 2024, we reached out to the community to gather feedback on the draft directions of the plan. That was used to help inform this plan. And a huge thank you to all the community members that attended our events and took time to fill out the surveys. So let's look at the highlights really quick to set the stage. We had 5 open houses across the region, and we also had 1 virtual session. We had 190 participants at those open houses. We also had a project webpage where people were able to find and fill out the survey. In total, we had 362 completed surveys. So what did we hear? Generally, we heard strong support for the draft vision. We heard support for the goals, with the most important goals being protecting the regionally significant natural areas and managing in a proactive and sustainable manner. Top landscape types of interest for regional parks were rivers and streams, followed by forests and wetlands. Top activity interests that we heard were hiking, followed by nature appreciation, dog walking, and swimming. So hiking was indicated by a strong majority of the participants, 90%. The top guiding keywords were conservation, which 78% of the participants indicated, followed by recreation at 69%. Followed by connectivity, climate resilience, and being well managed. What else did we hear? We also heard strong support for funding. So 97% of the respondents supported contributing more than $20 annually. Currently, for a house valued at $800,000, taxpayers are paying $11.20 into this service. More than 48% indicated they'd be willing to spend more than $80 a year. And 25%, which was the most selected threshold, were willing to contribute more than $100 annually a year. Spending priorities were acquiring regional parkland, followed by protecting the environment, and then followed by developing regional park amenities. Some of the top concerns, basically those are largely a reflection of current park concerns, because we don't have a regional park service at this point. But it was interesting to hear that. Their concerns were environmental impacts, overuse, user conflict, maintenance trail conditions, and followed by dog management. And what I thought was really interesting, one of the things that we learned was through the spectrum, we asked, where would you like to see regional parks sit in terms of recreation and conservation on that spectrum? And it really ended up being almost a 50-50. So I think that really speaks to the need for regional parks to provide that environmental protection, but also ensure people have access to those spaces to recreate. So on to that, I'll pass this on to Kate, who will provide some high-level highlights of the draft plan, after which we'll turn it over to the committee for discussion. Kate?
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark, and through the chair. Again, just echoing, I really appreciate being here again today. It feels like a long time from 6 months, but looking forward to the conversation. And thanks to Mark for giving us the important grounding, because really in a process like this, getting to the document has a whole bunch of information that comes behind it, and it's important to kind of ground us with how we got to where we are today. So with that as a launching point, I'm going to pick up and walk us through really just the highlights of the strategic plan. It is a substantial document, and I think you all have it in your agenda. And so in the interest of time and making sure that most of the time here is directed by questions and comments from all of you, I'm going to just touch in on these 3 items. So starting with goals and objectives, and then an example of how the actions kind of relate to the overall framework and back to the vision, goals, and objectives. And all of the highlights that I'm speaking here to today are from section 3 of the document, which is kind of the core, the way forward. So to begin, the circle graphic here, which you may have noted in the document, is really just used to illustrate the framework and structure of the strategic plan. And so it works from the outside inward, starting with the vision at the broadest scale and focusing at each layer along the way through goals, objectives, and finally with actions, the implementation side of things. So as the first highlight, the plan goals, they support the realization of the strategic plan vision, and really reflect the values of what is most important for the regional parks and trail system here in the Comox Valley. They also act as a checklist. So if a proposed action meets a lot of the plan goals that we see here, then it's a way to indicate support for the vision and intent of the overall system. And so these are used both to guide the strategic plan that we have in front of us, but also as a framework for adaptive planning and management. So as things come up along the way through the years, as this plan lives on and as things are implemented, these are a checkstone that go beyond what's within the pages of the document itself. So there are 6 goals that are presented in the draft plan. And from the workshop with the committee back in the fall, there were 7 at that time. And so there have been some refinements, also some things that have carried through, and that's the culmination of feedback that we got from the committee, as well as heading into further discussions with Comox First Nation and then with the community broadly. So just to try and remind and kind of illustrate how we got to these 6 goals coming from where we were in draft framework and directions in the fall. There was previously a goal number 4, which has been removed, and this was previously enhanced livability for current and future residents. And a lot of that was our conversation actually with the committee and really distilling down what's of key importance to the Regional Parks and Trails strategic plan and getting into the heart of that. And that goal was identified as something that's more broad and strategic for the region, but not as specifically important as the other goals that were identified for this service. Goal number 3, increase environmental and community connectivity, has been revised in order to more openly reflect the important role of connectivity for the natural environment as well as for our communities and for people. So we are a part of nature, but trying to elevate really the lens of the natural world within it. Through working with Comox, the wording of what is now goal 1 has been revised from previously it was collaborate with Comox First Nation, now work together with Comox First Nation to plan and manage. And as a result of just some internal work and discussions in the overall engagement, we've shifted this goal to be the first in the list of 6 that you see here. As far as the final revisions, there have been some for the other goals that are provide opportunities for nature-based recreation, strengthen stewardship and community partnerships, and manage in a proactive and sustainable manner. Those goals have had small changes to wording just to make them cohesive with the entire list, but they have adapted and moved forward in a somewhat similar stage from the beginnings. Moving along to the next layer and the next area of focus is the objectives. And so objectives really summarize the next steps that have been identified through this process to realize the vision and goals of the plan. So overall, there are 12 objectives identified in the strategic plan, and the first 6 objectives are planning focused. So the first being work together with Comox First Nation, the second being secure land for regional parks and trails, third being balance conservation and recreation interests, fourth, support the region's resilience and ecosystem services, 5, provide high-value visitor experience, and 6, enhance regional connectivity. The next 6 objectives are more on the management side, and so they relate to early actions, but also to ongoing as the service establishes and as locations and sites are added to develop a network. And so the management objectives are to develop a sustainable funding model, to manage staffing, operations, and assets proactively, to foster and strengthen partnerships, to develop policy and procedure documents, to build communications and awareness, and finally, to monitor and update the plan. And objective 12, the final one there, to monitor and update, really identifies the adaptive planning process that is needed in order to implement the network and the service over time. So at a high level, that's the objectives that nest down. The last item that I'll touch on briefly is actions. And actions are the final, most focused layer as we look at our kind of target or our illustration diagram for the strategic plan framework. And they are the steps that support realization of the objectives and that form the implementation plan. And so there are 60 actions in total, and they're organized under the 12 objectives. So on screen here is just an example pulling forward objective number 1, which is identified by the number and then also by the short phrase, so work together with Comox First Nation. So each objective is identified both with a number, the short statement, as well as supporting information below it. And the top right is just an indication of the key goals supported by this objective and the series of actions associated with it. Then there are a series of actions, and on the bottom right is the indication that you'll see on each page of objectives. There's, in some instances, supporting information, which dives into some further detail beyond the objective and action level. So in this first example, there are 5 actions associated with this objective. In terms of wayfinding throughout the document, all actions have 2 numbers. The first number correlates to the objective that it's associated with. So here it's number 1, and then the second number identifies the individual action. So for here, it's 1 through 5. And for the actions, I won't read through word for word, but in the highlight, it is for the actions to do with working together with Comox First Nation. Action 1 is governance, 2 is around land acquisition, 3 is visibility, 4 is co-management, and 5 is for harvesting and gathering. So the implementation plan organizes the 60 actions by relative recommended time frame. And so that's where each of these summary pages then, if you look at the implementation plan, you'll see the corresponding actions represented there, and they'll have further information in regards to the timing relative and the parties, the key parties involved in moving that action forward. So in a brief few minutes, that's the highlight, touch in on a few of the key aspects of the draft plan as it sits. I'll turn it back to Mark in the committee for discussion.
Okay, questions, comments, thoughts? '21. I think that's Director McCollum.
Thanks, Chair.
Oops, I did too.
Yeah, thanks for this report. I'm very happy with how the strategic plan turned out. I think it is a really good reflection of this session that we are able to participate in, and yeah, I think it's really well laid out, and it's going to be a great document for communicating with the wider community and where the service is going. So I don't have a lot of questions on that, but generally just wanted to express that I think it's turned out really well so far. The question I had actually was on one of the figures. It jumped out to me in the report, and then it was highlighted by Mark that most of the survey respondents were either willing or willing to pay more than what the current requisition is, or even more than that, somewhere between 90 and 56%, I think is what was in the report. My question is, how many respondents did we have that made up that number? I saw some what we heard numbers compiled, but I wasn't sure if if the survey was constructed out of some people that attended open houses and some people that responded online. So I just wanted to know what the sample size was. And then subsequent to that, and maybe this isn't at your fingertips, but I'm wondering what other regional districts with similar services are charging for the average home in those areas, just as kind of a loose comparative.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think I don't exactly know all the details, but my understanding is that the sample size is 362, and that was the total participants. So that was people that filled out surveys at the actual open houses, and then also the people that went online and filled out the surveys. So my understanding is it's 362 is the sample size. I'm actually not aware of what other regional districts charge. And maybe Kate can help with that.
Okay. Go ahead, Kate.
Perfect. Yeah, Mark, I can get the exact number. Sometimes we don't require that question to be answered. So my guess is it's something slightly lower than 362, but it is representative of both people that we engage with in person at open houses as well as online. But as with all the rest of the content, it is that section that we heard from. So it was a reasonable number in terms of the process for similar processes like these, but it is only a representation of those that we heard from.
Director Grieve.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I actually plowed through about 135 pages of all the comments before I quit. But, you know, I think it was very obvious that people do very much value the natural order and the beautiful surroundings we have here in the Comox Valley, all the natural amenities that we enjoy. But obviously, some people kind of underestimate the complexity of actually acquiring these pieces and how long it takes and what it takes to do it. So I'm heartened by the you know, the overwhelming support for different reasons by different people, but you know, like you say, it pretty well 50-50 there between you know, static and active parks. My question would be around freshwater swimming potential, because if you remember back a couple of 7 or 8 years ago, we actually had that on our work plan when we at the ASC and trying to get access to a lot of the places in the Solom River and Puntlish River, some of which is there are public accesses there. There are MOTI right-of-ways, but people built fences and, you know, put buildings up, and same sort of thing they do at the foreshore of the ocean. So my question would be, you know, how big a priority is this, and would we be willing to keep that fairly high on the agenda? Because having grown up here, I know a whole bunch of swimming holes we can't get to anymore. So that to me would be a real plus. And freshwater swimming, of course, is not the same as in the saltwater, and it's not even the same as being in the lakes when you're in the rivers. So I just wonder how high a priority that would be.
Go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair. I did show a slide earlier that did list the top activities, and swimming was there at number 4. But you know, my understanding, I can't remember what the exact numbers are, but I believe that it was still at 40-something%. So almost 50% of respondents did want to see swimming. So those top 4 are all kind of in that 40 to 50% range. So I think from what we're hearing, there's strong desire to have more freshwater swimming.
Absolutely. Director Moran, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks so much for the report. I really enjoyed reading it, actually. I didn't get through all of it, but yeah, a couple things. the older demographic was pretty prominent in terms of filling out the survey. And I know it's always difficult to engage with a wide range. Made me think about the Courtney playground study where we had so many young people involved in the input of that, and just wondering how to get younger folks involved. And then 74% were without children. So that was fairly striking, I thought. We are missing some voices there. I don't know how we fix that. The other thing, a comment from the verbatim comments that stood out to me was educate the public on the richness, biological, cultural, and other of the area protected within the park. And it stood out because while there were some wonderful comments, really appreciating the role of Comox First Nation and Indigenous history and cultural significance of land. There were also quite a few comments that basically said, delete that, like, referring to Comox First Nation. So
Just now. Yeah, you're good.
okay. So to try to put a positive spin on that, when I saw the comment about educating, it made me think that there's a real opportunity here to provide some education on the cultural significance of the land that we are all on, that is many consider to be stolen land, and to really embed that in this as much as possible and to provide some education to the public around that. The other thing that stood out in relation to that is that almost half the folks who responded have been here 15 years or less. And it makes me wonder if maybe there isn't as much awareness about Comox First Nation. And so those were just some comments that I thought would be good to consider how we can weave more understanding and education into how we move forward. And really, I'm really happy to see the number one goal is work together with Comox First Nation, because I do see that as an integral part of this. Thanks.
Thanks, Director. Doug, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm not, I guess.
No pressure.
Yeah, I don't really know what there is to kind of respond to that. Comox First Nation is a really high priority. And we very much look forward to working together with them as we build the service.
I wonder about, I know it's late in the game, but somehow engaging SD 71 to get youth perspectives on this work. Director Hardy, you must be number 10. Let's see. No, you're not. Okay. 6. Oh, you're 6. Sorry. Okay, now you're good.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, going through the document, I did have a few questions regarding the population of the Comox Valley and the survey of 362. When we start looking at 362 people out of nearly 80,000 population here in the Comox Valley, I start wondering about whether or not, there's a few people in the community that are really kind of dictating how the park service is going to work down the road. Again, going back, I think there's 190 people that were involved in the various public houses. So even just the input of 190 people from a population of nearly 80,000, I was just kind of a little concerned about those numbers. I did see, I think, a couple of slides down in the materials that were provided to us. It was 362 in the survey, and then later on in the presentation or the summary, it was 350. So I was just kind of wondering about those numbers as well. Another comment I had, or a question that I had, was again, it's a 20-year strategic plan. And I'm just wondering again, if 20 years is maybe a little too long or not. Is there periodic renewal? And I guess the concern that I would have is if we have a strategic plan that says, here's the plan for the next 20 years. And then, 5 years from now, based upon more community engagement and stuff, that, maybe we should tweak the strategic plan, that maybe we don't have the ability. Or sometimes we get confined in that box where the strategic plan says, we can only do this and we can only do that. And if we're going to tweak that strategic plan, then we have to go back to the board and we have to go back to the parks committee, et cetera. So just some concerns regarding that type of stuff, I guess, was some of the big items for me. And then again, with regards to the governance with Comox First Nation, again, just, I know the service is fairly new, but just trying to understand how, are we looking at establishing some type of a park board or something like that down the road? Or if this committee is that park board? And again, based upon my experience with the Comox First Nations, I know there's a park with the town of Comox and the Comox First Nation that they are looking at collaboratively co-governing and co-managing. And I'm just wondering if that's something that should be considered moving forward with regards to the strategic plan. Thanks.
Thanks, Director. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, through the chair. Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I guess the first one was your concern about the number of people, and I definitely understand that. I think we've done a really strong, robust job of trying to get as many people out as possible. I think the numbers that we got are pretty much in line with other strategic plans for parks that I've seen. I think for the electoral area park one, I think it was around 300 as well. So I don't think that it's totally out of whack in terms of the numbers that we got. And the 20-year strategic plan goal, or objective number 12, was monitor and update the plan. One of the actions in that objective was to do a review at 5 years, and then another review, and then a milestone review at 15 years. So building that in and trying to make sure that the plan is adaptive is within the plan. And I agree with you completely that needs to be in there to make sure that this committee can change the service as needed. And then the last one, in terms of the governance with Comox First Nation, those are questions that we still have bringing forward with Chief and Council. So at this stage, we're not really sure how they wish to be engaged in the governance piece, but we're definitely open to hearing what they have to say.
Sure.
So thanks. So again, a 5-year review and then a 15-year review to me is, again, a little troubling. And that's just my opinion for what it's worth. Two reviews within a period of 15 years for your parks strategic plan. To me, I think you need to be looking at that thing at least the first 5 years. And to me, every 5 years after that would be more reasonable than just 5 years and then 15 years. Another item that I did see with the strategic planning revolved around dogs. And I know it can be quite a contentious issue when we start looking at the amount of trails that people like to take their dogs out on. I know some folks, will see the signs out there that says that your dog needs to be on a leash, but quite often we'll see dogs that aren't, and that the signs apply to everybody else but me. So I'm just wondering down the road how we're going to address that issue, because I know it's impacted some of our farmers in the rural areas where dogs are going out and attacking their animals, and it's costing them well over $200,000 in revenues. So I'm just kind of wondering again, looking at that report, there seemed to be a lot of folks that were interested in making sure that trails are more accessible for dogs. But again, there's that concern with regards to dogs not being on leash And then how do we go about enforcing that so we don't have some of these incidents that we are having with our farmers in the rural communities? Thanks.
Thanks, Director Hardy. Do you want to speak to the management?
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
I just want to clarify on one of the action 12.1, the actual first one is to do annual progress reviews. So it is more than just the 5 and 15 years. So my apologies for missing that. I don't know all of the action items by heart yet, but I'll try to get there. In terms of the dogs, the dog management piece, I think that's really like an operational issue. So I think at this point in the strategic plan, I don't know if we need to get into the details on how we're going to address dog issues. It is something that we're working on in the electoral areas. We've heard concerns about dogs and we are trying to educate the public. We are bringing forward, we did have another bylaw officer that started this year, and we have started a really strong campaign to tell people that if your dogs aren't off leash or they're off leash in leashing mandatory areas, then you will be fined. And so we're hoping that those patterns of people's behaviors do change, but it's a tough one. And it's not only our parks, but it's all municipal parks like right across BC that are dealing with the dog management issue.
Thank you for that. I can't remember is it Will's next? Okay.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks for this report. I agree with what the other comments. Is a really strong foundation to be building from. And I guess I have one question I was going to ask you just in general. So was there anything that surprised you in terms of the results that came out? And this doesn't necessarily surprise me, but I found it very striking that conservation in the end outweighed recreation. I think in that graph you had with kind of the two humps, the conservation one was bigger. And in the evaluation criteria ratings, the top 4 values are not about people or their use of the park. Than in the parks, which I thought was really, and it's quite a clear distinction. Like those top 4 are, and of course the overall regional significance and KFN rights holders stand above that. But of the ones that were kind of being ranked, although I did find in the individual comments that they tended often to focus more on people and how they recreate, and maybe that's just a function of people getting specific with their thinking and thinking about themselves and what they do. Did you see a disjunction between the kind of the more 1 to 10 ratings of the evaluation criteria and the anecdotal comments? And I would assume that we'd probably trust the kind of the aggregated information, not the anecdotal comments when we're looking. So I guess, did anything surprise you is my first question, and how do you balance that slight disjunction between the anecdotal and the numerical values?
Yeah, through the chair, I'll jump in with that, and I think I'll ask Kate to have her opinions there as well. But for me, one of the big things that surprised me was the 50-50 split with the recreation and conservation. When we had come to the board and we'd had our original discussions, there was a huge focus on conservation and only, and having it really clearly laid out through our engagement that people also want to have the ability to recreate was, I guess, is surprising in some way, but also was really good to hear. When we look at our lowland area, we don't really have that much park space. It may look like we have a lot of park space in our region, but we don't really. So, and I think that that's kind of one of the things that came out of this report for me. And then if you want to jump on the comments piece.
Sure. Okay. Through the chair. Yeah, those are some great observations, and I was having the same kind of thought. The interesting thing when we craft a survey, we do try and think about how people will respond in a way that we're not trying to elicit a certain response, and we're trying to give options. And so that's why we have the combination of closed and open. And oftentimes you will get a slight difference in what people say if they're given a list of opportunities or if they're just speaking off the cuff. I think it was also really important that we tempered it with the conversations in person in the open house, acknowledging there's only a certain portion of the community that's able to access that opportunity. So always kind of checking and balancing it. But I think it was it was kind of the across platform. Some people only engaged by leaving a digital drop on the map. Some people came physically to the open house. Others really promoted and participated in the online survey. And you've noticed some trends that we also noticed, which is absolutely when asked to put in their own words things, it was often more people focused, you know, what are you doing on a Saturday? But I think it was quite clear in conversations as well, when we actually had back and forth conversations as opposed to just a one-sided comment, that there was a really strong recognition of the role of regional parks. We built understanding, I guess I can say, in that a lot of people didn't understand what regional parks were going to be or that they didn't exist, and the opportunity for them to have that dual or the potential for the dual recreation and conservation. We didn't plant that with the exception of saying that there's a spectrum. I was surprised. I thought we were going to have a midpoint. Mark kind of mentioned midpoint, but I think it's important to see that we actually had two very distinct peaks. And so not very many people actually said we need a middle balance. There was an equal, almost equal, slightly more weighted. And I think that's really important. We kind of wanted to say not just an average of 50 or not just a 5, because I think those two very distinct but almost mirrored trends really show that there's it's the push and pull between that conservation and recreation piece. And I think it's been an important theme in our conversation with all kind of levels of participation, internal and external. It was really interesting to see those. So for me, the surprise was to see those two peaks. Conservation slightly ahead, which I wasn't as surprised. I was actually a little bit surprised to see how strongly the recreation piece was. And maybe that's just mostly because interest groups and others that we were engaging in more depth in phase 1 were seemingly more weighted on the conservation and protection. It's a long answer, but yeah, some diversity in how the trends came through.
Thanks. As I'd say, just in a final comment, I think that double peak graph is probably again sort of emblematic of the key challenge we're going to have in trying to make all this work. That one image really struck me because it's just not common. You see that kind of distribution with a very low point in the middle. But yeah, anyway, thanks for your comments.
Yeah. Thanks for that perspective. I think Director Kerr is next.
This is getting exciting statistical analysis of graphs. Yeah, this is exciting. So not surprisingly, my favorite part of the report was page 55 or 63 of the appendix, the evaluation criteria and the points rating system. I'd love to do a deep dive on this, but I know we don't have time. Quick questions would be, like, how are we going to decide the correct weighting of the different factors? Obviously, we talked a lot about connectivity early on in this in the parks, creation, and so that connectivity piece, weighting that maybe heavily early on might be something that this group would want to do. And then two things that I thought were maybe missing, realizing that the points rating system might not be complete. The one is like neighborhood or community members' proximity to parks currently. So there might be a pocket in the valley that are further away than average to a park that they could recreate in or enjoy the conservation features of a park. So if we identified a pocket that was further than average away, would that be an area that we'd look for a park, and therefore that might be weighted heavier? And secondly would be the geographical allocation of new parkland. So if the first 3 or 4 new parks brought in were all in one geographical area, then perhaps another area within the regional district might get a higher weighting at that time. So more kind of like time-based weighting based on what has already been brought in and or geographical proximity. I'm wondering if any thought has been brought on that. Sorry if that was too nerdy.
That was great. Whoops, sorry. Go ahead, Kate. Okay, thank you. Not too nerdy at all. Through the chair. So yeah, we did actually, all through the process up until this point, we had discussions on access and distribution. So in the earlier forms of, and this is still the draft evaluation criteria and rating framework is still in development. And I agree with you, we could probably have an entire other workshop devoted to that. Maybe as a small note, we'll say that we're developing it as far as we can
within the strategic plan process. And one of the actions and recommendations is through the land acquisition strategy for it to be tested and further refined. Because in the abstract, there's only so far we can go and it needs to actually be tested. So we will progress this further, but there will be another, that kind of adaptive management piece is spelled out specifically around that item. In terms of proximity to access and geographic distribution, we had some really good and detailed conversations with this, mostly in phase 1. And the direction at that point that we heard from interest groups and even from discussion here at the committee in November was that that's particularly important in a community parks or in a municipal system. And in the regional system, it was deemed to be of less importance. And the idea there being that in the process of how we've gone through and established the draft framework, really the kind of identifying regional significance was of more importance than access to certain areas. So in evaluation, it's looking at what are the areas under greatest threat or of the highest values, and that's what we're looking for. And it's almost regardless of where it's located in terms of accessibility. That to be said, it's not entirely out of the picture. It's just not the decision-making consideration. That was the conversation. So in the earlier draft, actually geographic distribution and accessibility or the angles of those terms were brought forward specifically as evaluation criteria, and they have intentionally at this stage of the draft been removed.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go to Director Grant because he hasn't spoken yet. Oh, I thought I was. Whoops, next, that's the next one. 5, you're 5.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, so just in reading this, I noticed that we have like with 362 people on the survey, that's less than 0.5%. It's hardly a mandate for us to go out and do some of the things that we want to do. I also noticed that you had 15 outdoor rec groups and 24 conservation groups. So no wonder their numbers were a bit higher, right? You had 10 more of them there. So, you know, I think that we have to really take this a little bit with a grain of salt. I mean, I think it's really good information, hardly a mandate. And I think that when you come to trying to purchase these things, number one, you have to figure out which ones you're going to purchase, and then you have to have somebody willing to sell it. And so I don't think you're going to get your options as much as you think you're going to get. And I think you're going to have very few that come up that are actually, like it's going to be one every 5 or 10 years, I think is what you're probably going to see. So a lot of that still needs to be worked out, but I would caution that we don't take this survey as this is what everybody wants to do, because it's a very, very small percentage of the people.
Thank you for those comments. I think I'm going to let Director Hardy go next because your light's already on.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to follow up again on a comment that Director Moran had made mention of regarding the demographic in the plan. And again, well over 65% of the folks that participated in the survey were over the age of 55. 75% of those folks did not have children under the age of 18. So again, I agree with Director Moore regarding that. There's a demographic that really hasn't really provided a lot of comments with regards to the plan, and just, you know, a little concerned about that. There was another chart in there regarding the costs, and the majority of those folks, again, 55+% were comfortable paying $80 to $100 annually for that service fee. And again, when we go back and we look at that demographic of most of those being seniors, I would imagine most of those seniors probably have their mortgage already paid off, not having to worry too much about, you know, the increase of living, cost of living, trying to clothe kids, get kids to the parks or swimming pools or hockey arenas. So again, that was a big thing that kind of stood out to me, was that most folks within that survey were comfortable with paying that $80 to $100 a year. And again, when we look at the demographic of the folks that filled out that survey, most of them are old timers. So they do have that disposable income. And of course, if I had that disposable income, I'd probably be saying, yeah, let's do 100. Let's do 150, whatever, right? It's not a big deal to me. So I think we got to be careful of that particular item that was put forward in the report. Thanks.
Director Grieve, I believe, is next.
Well, I resemble that remark. We have the 60 over 60 here in the Comox Valley, as you know. So it is kind of indicative of the current until we have the great die-off of our demographics. But I wanted to stress again the value of being flexible and agile regarding parks, because some of our parks, like Bear Creek Park, was not even on the park plan when it was offered by Patty Evans as a gift to the Comox Valley. And I actually heard people say, we don't want it because it's not on our plan. Well, you know, we're going to have to actually be opportunists here, because a lot of these things come up and they won't be there for long. So we have to be able to move on them. I think that we have to also remember that we have a 3/4 vote threshold for acquiring parks. I mean, 75% of us have to agree on purchase of a park. And we don't know what's coming around the bend. So, you know, I don't think we have to etch this thing in stone. But again, I think it's really important that we take advantage of situations when they arise. And that's going to dictate a lot of the direction of this service, more so than sitting down and plotting it out, because that isn't the way it's going to work. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I appreciate those comments, and the communications around the plan, I think, will go a long way into getting it out into the community and having those opportunities come up, but also having preferences and the continued input from the community through the committee. Director Morin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I guess I'm officially an old timer. Thanks, Director Hardy. I wasn't quite ready to go there yet, but anyway, so a couple things around, well, the timeline, and I appreciate Director Grant's comments that, you know, it's not like land's going to come up all the time, and we may not have that many acquisitions over the course of time, but we do know that these things get sprung on us as well. Opportunities arise that we have to move on pretty quickly. And I did see in the timeline that the acquisition piece was under the short-term timeline, which is 2029. And I get that this all takes time. And I know that when we embarked on this, we talked about it would be a long time before we would acquire land or land for park. I believe this was passed, was it 20, did we officially become a service in 2021? I believe. I think so. I think that's, so, I mean, that would be 8 years from the time we became a service. And I guess I do feel a sense of wanting to, obviously we have to wait for land to become available. There's all kinds of parts of that process, things that have to line up and fall into place. But I felt that the timeline of at the earliest 2029 to acquire land was, or to create a park was quite a long time. So I'm not sure if there's a way to massage that a little bit aside from increasing the requisition. And I think that Director Hardy made some good points. And I guess the engagement process is really on my mind because I did an interview this morning on the City of Courtenay's engagement process that we're a strategy that we're embarking on, and the consultant interviewed me. So we were talking a lot about engagement and the best ways, and I appreciate Director Cole Hamilton's comments as well. Like, I found quite a discrepancy between the narrative and the comments and the more aggregated results. And I think the engagement piece is always so difficult because you just don't really know what the flavor is. And then of course we've got 300 and something respondents. So I think it's all pretty complex, but I guess my main question is around the timeline and thoughts around that. And if you could give me a bit more information on how we landed, how we landed there. Thank you.
Thanks, Director. Go ahead, Kate.
Great. Yeah, through the chair, thank you, Director Moran. I'll do my best to answer in a couple of brief points. So in terms of timeline, it's by 2029. So it's just suggesting that something has happened by that date, but doesn't preclude it happening before. And really the driver of that being short instead of immediate was giving space for the land acquisition strategy, and in particular with that process being done with Comox First Nation. But maybe coming back to comments from Director Grieve and others, we have tried to iterate maybe one too many times in the document. There is the planning component, and then there is the need to be opportunistic. And so having some tools and strategies coming out of this document and the land acquisition strategy, so that there will be a process kind of long-term to track things for when they could be available, but also to give a framework so that with confidence and in a rather swift manner, perhaps, the committee is able to review, hold a meeting and look for opportunities. I think that full picture is really what we're envisioning. The plan is not trying to impede acquisition in any way, but to really build a good foundation in order for the committee and others to be able to answer to the public as to decisions made.
Thanks, Kate. I think Director Kerr is next.
Thanks. And just to tie the timelines question, which was a good one with the funding concerns as well. I mean, if I look at page 68 of the report or 76 of the appendix, I think F6, donations and fundraising, this is to Director Grieve's point, I think is really important. I think the way we speed up our timelines is we have more parkland donated, people's legacy funds, et cetera. So I almost wonder if F6 should be moved up to F1 and we just prioritize that. And communication in the early stages, it would be to put a call out, express how it can be done, what the tax benefits are to an estate. Those kind of donations could be really powerful in expediting our timelines and not having to increase the tax levy as much. So that's what I would recommend.
Thank you, Director. Good idea. Director Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. One of the things I didn't see in the draft, and a question that's been brought up at the Electoral Services Committee revolves around the two jewels of the Comox Valley being Mount Jeffrey and Seal Bay Parks, and whether or not those particular parks would fall under the Regional Park Service down the road is something that has been discussed, I know, at the East table and not so much at this particular table. But again, when we start looking at those two very significant parks, whether they should fall under the Regional Park Service is something that I would like to see some more conversations revolving around. I don't know if that would fall under this plan or not. Thanks.
You want to respond?
Yeah, through the chair. I think when you're looking at things like existing parks, I mean, I think the way forward is that the electoral area committee or municipal staff bring something forward to this committee to consider. And we have a 75% threshold for acquiring land. So it would be up to this committee then to whether they want to take on those ongoing operating costs or not. I don't think that necessarily needs to be embedded in the strategic plan at this stage.
Thanks for that. Director Moran. I'm sorry, McCollum.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just had a question around the actions part of the report and just how resourcing is laid out both for immediate and then I think the next one short term, which could be considered fairly immediate as well, depending on how things proceed. And I'm just thinking back to when we last deliberated on the budget that there was staffing increase for the service, and that was kind of the first point at which we had had a discussion around that. And there's a number of things connected to actions for the service that is going to demand staff increase. And I'm wondering at what point we begin to have those conversations around priorities. If we were to proceed with all of the actions that have associated staffing impacts, we could be peeling off a fair amount of the requisition to the staff capacity piece. And yeah, just want a bit of clarity on how that discussion will proceed in advance of our next budget. And I would imagine that we're going to have some discussions around changing the requisition as well as we move through the next steps in this process.
Thanks. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, through the chair. Maybe James can jump in on this, but I think that that's really going to be part of the future budget process. Is that not right, James?
Yeah, if I recall during the budget discussions, there was resources identified for post strategic plan adoption approval, whatever it is, and we're at a draft stage right now. The plan is set to come back to this committee later this summer, fall.
Yeah, the final plan in probably September.
And so
But we're going to be coming back to the committee with a final draft plan in July, late July.
Okay, so that my impression would be that when that final plan is presented in September or in the fall, there's going to be some consideration about then the actions to be taken to implement the plan. And that's where the consideration for resources and just how much can be taken on given the existing resources we have and given the current budget. And then, of course, during subsequent budget discussions moving into the next year, that would be for further consideration.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
So at that time, we could talk about the fundraising, like whether we want to give capacity to that piece through staff or consulting or as well.
Yeah, I think that depending on the actions that are put forward as most opportune through the strategic plan, those that will need staff resources to affect, we'd have to be able to tell you that we can actually do that with the existing budget that we have. And if we don't, we would have to tell you that and then either come back at a subsequent budget discussion or look for some other means to deliver on those actions.
Okay, great. Director Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just wanted to make a quick comment on some of the funding options, and I was glad to see that user and private enterprise free programs were in last place and 9th. I'd be happy if they were slightly lower even than that, but and it seems to be largely in terms of, I guess, trying to recover some costs, particularly in terms of operations. My assumption, and maybe I'm wrong, is that the degree of enforcement required and the machinery and the ticket machines, things like that, would tend to reduce any like really significant revenue stream that could come off that. And I think that probably these parks are likely to be in places where people would need a private vehicle to get to them in the first place. And if you then add on to the further barrier parking, imagine we're going to go somewhere, we're going to pay parking for the day or somewhere else, then it would just naturally, it seems to be the least productive and the most likely to prohibit or diminish, use by users. So glad to see it in last place, and I hope it doesn't play any significant role in future funding discussions.
Thanks for those comments. Director Morin.
Sorry, another quick question. And I apologize if I missed it in the report, but in terms of user groups, we did have quite a few folks from user groups that would in that balance of recreation and conservation, if would have some wear and tear on the park system. Has there been discussion around contributions by user groups? I'm thinking about the horse folks and the disc golf people. I know Cumberland has some kind of agreement with user groups for their trail system. I guess I'm just wondering about that. If there was something that was allowing those user groups, how would we figure that out? Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair. I think I can just speak to the electoral area services, what we do with our user group. So you brought up the horse, backcountry horsemen. They help with a lot of in-kind work within our park service. They build trails for us and they help us maintain trails. So they may not be contributing actually financially, but they actually contribute quite a bit of in-kind. So maybe there's something like that moving forward.
Thanks. Thank you for that. Any other questions? Director Arbor, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Chair. No, pretty good. I think the group covered a lot of the good points. And in regards to the survey, I would say we went with a self-selective survey. So that's the basic flaw of how you end up with really, I think if we commission a random survey that targets all demographics, we would have stronger validity. So maybe just a lesson for the future for such an important exercise. And otherwise, just a lot of good points raised by colleagues here. So and I'm not trashing the report. I'm just saying it's just a limitation. Whenever you choose a self-selecting survey style, you're bound to get people that have more time on their hands to answer, that have more interest in the topic. So I think it's when people say we should take it with a grain of salt, it's not like we discount those views either, but it's definitely people that would be more caring about parks and older that would probably answer it. So no surprise to me. In the future, maybe a random survey would address the concerns that were raised today. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks, Director Arbor. And I'm having heard that quite a bit around the table. I wonder if there's some a piece we can do through communication to continue to invite that feedback, even by email or something. Director Hardy, I see your light again.
Yeah, just one final comment, and it's directed towards Director Arbor. Did you like how I remembered to include Mount Jeffrey as one of the jewels of the Comox Valley?
Political capital.
Okay, seeing no more questions, I believe we've already received, so there's a second recommendation there, if anyone would like to move. That was Grieve and Morin, thank you. That is recommendation number 2. And all in favor of the recommendation, do you want me to read it? No? Yes? That staff report back to Regional Parks and Trails Committee and present an updated final draft plan, which incorporates feedback received from Comox, First Nation, interest groups, and the committee. And on that, I think we are ready to move in camera. Anyone would like to move that?
No.
All in favor? Did you catch those? Thank you. Okay, and none opposed. Thank you.